Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healing Connections podcast. I'm your host, Emmy Vadnais, and today we are talking about heaven and earth with Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell. And Dr. Eben Alexander was an academic neurosurgeon for over 25 years, including 15 years at Brigham and Women's Hospital, Children's Hospital, and Harvard Medical School in Boston, with a passionate interest in physics and cosmology. He is the author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Proof of Heaven and Map of Heaven, and co-authored with Karen Newell, Living in a Mindful Universe. Karen Newell has spent a lifetime seeking wisdom through esoteric teachings and firsthand experience exploring realms of consciousness. She empowers others by demonstrating how to connect to inner guidance, achieve inspiration, improve wellness, and develop intuition. She is co-founder of Sacred Acoustics and co-author with Dr. Eben Alexander of Living in a Mindful Universe. Welcome, Karen and Eben. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having us on, Emmy. It's great to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Well, you two have been very busy sharing so much with so many people for several years now. And Eben, I was wondering if you could just, you detail in your beautiful book, Proof of Heaven, so much of your near-death experience. And then you go on to the Map of Heaven to share even more, which really, when I read it, really just expanded my consciousness even more. And then the most recent book here is Living in a Mindful Universe, a neurosurgeon's journey into the heart of consciousness, that you both co-authored and is really inspiring. So I'd love to hear a little bit, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about that experience. And I think what's so fascinating about your story is that you are a neurosurgeon, has taught at Harvard, very accomplished, and has had this experience that expanded your consciousness. And then Karen, you came into the picture. I'd love to hear how that began and how your journey with consciousness has helped Eben and others to grow in those realms.
Okay, well, I think important to point out is I'd spent all those years developing that conventional scientific worldview that turned out to be wrong. And my journey in November of 2008 was, in many ways, in retrospect, kind of an amazingly clever demonstration of what I really needed to understand to make better sense of consciousness, brain and mind. And to kind of cut to the chase, the journey itself, which, as you pointed out, is described in great detail in the book Proof of Heaven, began in a ugly, coarse, kind of underground realm that I call the earthworm's eye view, very primitive existence, like being in dirty jello that seemed to go forever and ever. Important to point out, one of the atypical features of my near-death experience, but very important for my individual soul journey, was the amnesia. The fact that during the entire experience, I had no language, no words, no memories of this earth or Eben Alexander's life, none of my religious beliefs, scientific knowledge. Every bit of it was deleted. Now, of course, in the initial weeks and months after I came back, when my brain was still very addled by the whole thing, but I was trying to make sense of my medical records and all, that's when I was just shocked to find out how damaged my brain was. And that is apparent in a case report that just came out in Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in September of 2018, a case report on my medical records, in which those 3 physicians who investigated my case, who were not involved in my care, were shocked that I could have any experience at all, given the documented damage to my neocortex. And I think that's a really important part of this, because it showed me a lot about consciousness that I could only really understand if I had some working knowledge of the brain and modern neuroscience, and a working knowledge of quantum physics. And so it helped me to go very far. But the rest of the spiritual journey, beginning in that ugly, coarse, earthworm eye view realm, I was ushered up through this slowly spinning white light that came with a perfect musical melody. And that ushered me up into the ultra-real gateway valley that had many Earth-like features. Like I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There was this incredibly lush plant life. And I remember this strong sense of buds and flowers and blossoms on trees opening up in these rich textures and colors. And I could sense all of it because I was becoming all of it. And then there were all these souls dancing below us down in the meadow there in that valley. And lots of joy and merriment, but it was all being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs that I when I came back to this world and weeks later was trying to record it all, I called them angelic choirs. And they were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that would just thunder through my awareness and help to fuel all this incredible festivity going on all around me. And it turns out there was that beautiful girl in the butterfly room who I identified as a guardian angel, but was someone who I had never met in my life. And I'd never read the near-death experience literature before. So after I wrote the first 20,000 words of my story and then started reading the near-death literature, I was shocked to find all the tremendous similarities. But also, you know, if I had scripted this, first and foremost, my dad would have been there. He had passed over 4 years before my coma, and he was nowhere to be found. And who was this beautiful guardian angel? Well, it turns out that those angelic choirs provided yet another musical portal up into higher and higher levels. I remember seeing the whole four-dimensional space-time realm, this material realm collapsing down, and then all of the spiritual realm around it with a different ordering of causality that I call deep time. All of that collapsing down, and my awareness expanded tremendously to where the entire higher dimensional multiverse was just used as a teaching tool in this awareness in the core. The core was as far as I went on this journey, and in the core realm, the entire higher dimensional multiverse throughout all of eternity was compressed into this one structure that I could identify with parts of as part of all these lessons. I mean, our words really don't do justice to my memories of the experience because it's so different from our material world experience, and yet in many ways so much more real. That's the thing that's so shocking to many near-death experiences that come back to this world. And you know, so it took me a long time to record all that, but then I've spent the next decade plus trying to make sense of it all. And that's where I've come to appreciate the efforts of the scientific community to explain all this. And I'm allied with many of those scientists around the world in helping to understand the reality of the afterlife and of reincarnation and how all that can fit into our modern scientific view of the world.
Yeah, it is. There's so much. And I think anybody who's listening who wants to understand this more, definitely get these books. I've read them all, and you, Eben and Karen, you both do a beautiful job of really getting into a lot of specifics and details. So just to spend a little bit more time on the science, and then I'd love to hear more from Karen as well. So just to reiterate, the kind of bacterial meningitis that you had, it sounds like by standards of what is sort of a generally accepted scientific worldview, is it true that most scientists or physicians would think that you wouldn't be able to have any thoughts or consciousness at all?
Well, given the damage to my neocortex, the answer is yes. And that evidence is covered in that case report. Anybody can read that case report if you go to EbenAlexander.com, look at my blog pages, go back to the blog I wrote in September 2018 about how the medical report validates the facts of my case. And in the fourth paragraph, you have a link directly to the case report itself. But the reality is they were shocked at how rapidly I went to coma. I mean, 3.5 hours from symptom onset to deep coma is a very rapid decline. And that aligns with a much diminished expectation for recovery. And although I started that week with about a 10% estimate of living through it, by the end of that 7 days in coma, not having shown any significant signs of neurologic improvement, having had a Glasgow coma scale the whole week, basically between 6 and 7, anything, 15 would be the score for us today, awake and alert. A corpse would score a 3. Anything below 9 on that scale is deep coma. And the entire week I was in coma, it started at 11, but then rapidly within an hour or so went down to that 6 to 7 range, which is pretty much where it stayed for the whole week. And given that, plus the MRI and CT scans that showed that all 8 lobes of my brain were affected, and my neurologic exam showed serious damage, not just to my entire neocortex, but even to my brainstem on day 1. So my entire brain was under siege from this horrific infection that when you read the medical records, it's frightening. I mean, when I read my medical records, I thought, well, this is of someone who's going to die. This cannot be my medical records because I was recovering. And the doctors agree with that. And that's what shocked the doctors who did this case review. was the amount of recovery, which they then went on in a peer-reviewed medical journal to postulate that that inexplicable miraculous recovery might be due to the spiritual content of my near-death experience. And that is because of their knowledge of other near-death experience cases like Anita Morjani, who had a severe lymphoma that went away after her NDE, or Mary C. Neal, the orthopedic surgeon who had a warm water drowning while kayaking, jammed her kayak under boulders 10 feet under water, was under there for more than 30 minutes. And anybody who knows anything about warm water drownings realize you don't come back from that. And yet she did. So these doctors were aware of profound miraculous healing occurring in certain near-death experiences. So they were wide open to the fact that I could have profound experience and also have this kind of recovery, but all of it keyed together with the elements of that near-death experience.
Wonderful. So you're really helping expand the consciousness of mainstream medical science to be open to that these spiritual, what we may term as spiritual experiences, can actually help in the recovery, which some people do come back from these near-death experiences, and of course some people don't. And so in your case, not only was it unusual that you recovered, it sounded like you had a very slim chance of recovery, but you also you were able to regain all of your cognitive and physical abilities, correct?
Yeah,
I mean, that's what it seems. You seem like you, not only are you where you were before, but even greater.
Well, you know, it's very haunting. That's the best word I can use for it, because the more I read my medical records, and this is all as my knowledge of neurosurgery from before was coming back to me over those first 2 months, I was shocked. And, you know, it's not a comfortable shock. It's like, oh my God, and trying to make sense of this. And that's what I've spent the last 10 years doing, but you're absolutely right. The most fundamental lesson here is really that we live in a universe where mind has great power over matter. The scientific and medical community has honored that kind of thinking for more than 6 decades by using the placebo-controlled scientific study to assess any new treatment. Ask Big Pharma if placebo effect is real. It's shockingly real. And for them, it's bad news, because it means right out of the block, you need about a 30% benefit of your drug just to overcome the power of belief in a patient. And it's not just the belief that they can get rid of their headache. As I said, it's important to look at noetic.org, and if you put in the search term there of spontaneous regression, you'll find a book that Noetic Sciences published back in the mid-1990s with more than 3,500 cases of spontaneous healing of cancers, infections, and other severe illnesses through a patient's belief that they could get better. So it's very important to understand any physical, mental, or emotional health is fundamentally spiritual. And when I use the word spiritual, it doesn't necessarily mean religious. Spiritual for me just means that we have this sense of connectedness of our mind with other beings and with basically the mind of the universe, with that God force. And also spirituality for me entails a notion of purpose and meaning in our life.
And so do you recall in your experience having a choice to return? I know the prayer seemed to be very powerful in you returning. Did you feel there was a pivotal point of making a choice to come back here?
Well, interesting that you mentioned prayer, because yes, I did get a profound vision of prayer during my coma journey. And it was at a point where, you know, I'd cycled through those 3 realms many times, you know, the earth were my view, the gateway valley, and then on up into the core realm, and then tumbling back down to that earth were my view. And always been told you're not here to stay when I get to that core realm. But that I'd be going back. And I'd even come to believe that going back was going back to the earth from my view. But what I found there was this incredible sense when I realized that remembering the musical notes of the melody no longer conjured up that light portal that led up into the Gateway Valley. I was also aware of thousands of beings going off into the distance. And their heads were bowed, arms up like this, many with candles, some with hoods. But this murmuring energy was bringing me the same loving power that I'd felt during my early visits in that Gateway Valley and in the core realm, where love was absolutely dominant. And so that was really amazing, was to see that power of prayer there and how effective it was. It helped me to come back. But the thing that really got me to come back to this world was very simple. And that was at the very end there, after seeing all those people in prayer and their energy, I saw 6 faces that would bubble up out of the muck. They'd say a few words and then disappear. And at that time, I still had no language because the words would mean nothing to me in that phase. You know, I was down back in kind of those primitive, coarse underworlds. And the reality is the 6th phase was of my son, Bond. 10 years old at the time. They kept the worst news from him during that whole week. On that Sunday morning, the doctors held a conference where they said I'd gone from a 10% chance of survival down to 2% chance, and that 2% did not entail much of any chance for recovery. And that was the bad news, which meant they were suggesting taking off antibiotics and all of the care measures. And that's when Bond ran down the hallway. There I was, ICU bed 10, eyes taped shut on the ventilator. He pulled open my eyelids, one eye looking over there, one eye looking over there. Neither pupil responsive. Those in medicine know that's a very bad sign. I didn't hear him with my ears or see him with my eyes, but the message got through. He was pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. And somehow I got through all the way into those deep, deep spiritual levels where I was. And I knew I had to come back. It was my responsibility to him as a soul that I was deeply attached to, even though I had no idea that this was a father-son relationship at the time. But I sensed his presence and his pleading with me. And that was really my impetus to try and come back to this world, even though I had no idea what that all meant.
And so, wow, well, beautiful. Thank you for recounting this. I know you've shared this many times, and it's just nice for those who are maybe new to your experiences to kind of give a little taste of what happened and to hear it from you firsthand. And also, I really love what you say about the brain being a filter for consciousness. Could you just share a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, important to point out, I certainly did not invent that concept. I would say it goes back to William James, the famous psychologist working at Harvard in the late 19th century. He knew from all of his investigations into the spiritual world and psychology that you needed you need something far grander to explain all this. So he envisioned consciousness as this huge ocean that was then filtered into the brain, allowed in this tiny little trickle. That view was also supported in the early 20th century by Henri Bergson in France, by F.C.S. Schiller in England, also by Aldous Huxley in the United States, this notion of primordial consciousness being allowed in through the filtering mechanism of the brain. And I would say, as we discuss in Living in a Mindful Universe, there's a tremendous amount of information that supports the reality of filter theory today. And it's important each and every one of us as individual journeyers because of what it tells us about our own consciousness and what the potential is for exploring that consciousness and seeing its relationship to the universe in living our lives.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for the history of that as well. And you're definitely helping to have other people be more open to these other dimensions that that we can access. And it's interesting that some people do and some people don't. And Karen, how did you and Eben connect, and how have you been a part of this journey?
Well, Eben and I connected in November 2011 when we were both using sound to kind of, I guess, get that filter out of the way and expand our consciousness. And of course, Eben's interest stemmed from his near-death experience. He wanted to reconnect with those realms that had become available to him when his brain was so damaged. But I had been spending years kind of trying to get that filter out of the way by other means that didn't involve a severe illness. And my interest in this kind of stemmed from really answers to big questions that nobody was really able to answer, like why are we here and what is our purpose? Certainly science can't answer those types of questions, and the religious traditions that I was exposed to, my Methodist religion, never really could satisfy them to my satisfaction. And so I kind of was on this search for learning more about how our world really works. And I came across a lot of, I'll call it Western esoterica, so theosophical writings, anthroposophy, Kabbalah, those sorts of things really interested me. And in all of these kind of writings and all of the spiritual traditions that I became sort of interested in spoke about this reality of the soul, this essence that is more than just what we know of as our physical body. And this is what I was very interested in learning about. And so meditation is one of those ways that is very often recommended. Get quiet inside, follow your breath. I found this exceedingly challenging because every time I went to sit quietly, I would just have lists and conversations going through my mind. I could not settle those distracting thoughts. And so I kind of told myself, oh, I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people who can't access these realms. I guess I'll just be normal. And yet I persisted and I did find techniques. And one of them was sound. And that's what, ended up connecting Eben and I, was this similar sort of sound technology. And something known as binaural beats or brainwave entrainment is what really helped me to settle that mind and those distracting thoughts. Now, these are sounds that sound like wah, wah, wah. So even a crystal bowl, if you hit a crystal bowl and it makes that beautiful kind of resonant sound, that's a binaural beat. There's a binaural beat in there. And what they do very precisely is we deliver one frequency to one ear, a slightly different frequency to the other ear. And it's the difference between those two frequencies that seems to, as Eben would say, affect the lower brainstem and effectively assists in putting that analytical mind sort of in a timeout. And so it allows you to quiet the mind more easily. Now, I won't say that it works the same for everyone. We're all unique, just like near-death experiences are all unique. Same with meditative experiences. We're talking about things that are taking place in our inner world. And so we can never really understand what's going inside anyone's inner world except our own. And we try to use words to describe it, to define what's going on, and others use their own experiences to kind of understand what that means. So it's a very private, kind of sacred, sanctum sanctorum, really, our inner world. And so as I became more interested in discovering all of these things, that inner world became incredibly vital and important. And I learned that when I got quiet inside, I could get in touch with the expanded part of me, maybe that part of me that knows more about the decisions of why I came here this lifetime around, and why I might have wanted to interact with certain people and learn particular lessons. And this has become an incredibly useful tool for me to really learn not so much what's going to happen when I die, but how can I use that information to inform my life here and now. And there's so many directions I could go there, but one of the most powerful experiences I've had in meditation is connecting with that force of love. That love that Eben and so many near-death experiencers talk about when they are released from the shackles of their body and brain. They experience this amazing love. And I have experienced it without having something like Eben describes. However, I have met others who, through meditation and other sort of spiritual tools and methods and techniques, they've been able to access this love. This love is available to all of us. And when we are able to connect with it inside and build it and feel it grow, this changes everything in your life. As you learn to pay more attention to your inner world, clear out emotional traumas, look at limiting beliefs, really try to learn how to manage your inner world with intention and attention. Then when this process is underway, you start to notice that the external world seems to take care of itself. And problems that you may have had before seem to start resolving themselves. And so there's so many directions I could go, but that's the general kind of way that Eben and I connected, and is very related to the work that we are doing on an ongoing basis, helping others to make these connections.
Yeah, and it's beautiful how you describe how everyone can connect with this, and that yes, we do need to find our ways. Why do you, either one of you or maybe both of you, want to share, why do you think it is for some people quite difficult to connect with these spiritual realms, connect with heaven on earth, or love?
Well, I'll start. Really the biggest blockade to any of this is our beliefs, our belief that it's possible. And we happen to live, most of us, I believe most of your listeners, I'm speaking very broadly here, but most of us live in the secular Western world. And that secular Western world is busy influencing the entire remainder of the world. And what they're telling us is that Science is correct. Science is the pathway to truth. And by the way, science says there is no God, there is no force. And what's so interesting is what Eben has really discovered, and he can speak better to this, is that that is an assumption. It is not a fact. And those of us who are lay people in the Western world, we don't make that distinction. When we hear a scientist say there's no meaning and purpose to your existence, there's no love in the universe, get over it, you just are alone and you're going to have to make it work. This is really doing a disservice, because that's not based on any scientific fact. It's based on an assumption. No one can prove that God exists. Likewise, no one can prove God doesn't exist. And I want to be careful when I use this word God. I'm not speaking about any particular religious dogma when I use that word. When I say God, I mean a force that's bigger than ours. Star Wars does a great job of talking about the force. Many of us can understand that better than a God that has a lot of literal kind of baggage that comes with it. But this idea that there's a force that connects us all, that we're all part of one consciousness, and that together we create our unfolding reality based on our current emotional and mental state. And this is something that our scientists have really done a disservice to us lay people and regular people in the world, and to themselves. And so the biggest block to being able to access that is believing that it's not possible, that it's not real, and that it's just our imagination. And so by changing our beliefs, by understanding that there really can be more to our world, it allows us the ability to start to access it. I don't know what you might have to add.
Well, I would just add that the entire scientific community is in the midst of a tremendous paradigm shift. And what we've known is, or called materialism, or physicalism, the notion that only the physical world exists, and that things like thoughts, emotions, dreams, that none of that has any basis in reality at all, other than being the result of some action in the physical world in the brain. It turns out that is just false, and it's about assumptions that were made in the scientific revolution going back 400 years about the primacy of the physical universe, that there was no such thing as mind. They assumed that the scientist was there in his white coat and clipboard taking notes about the world around him, without admitting that in fact none of it exists, without his mind asking the questions and then being answered in specific ways by the universe. But a tremendous amount depends on that investigating mind. And in fact, what modern quantum physics would tell us in no uncertain terms is that there is not an objective physical universe out there independent of our observations. And that's why, in fact, for materialist scientists who study quantum physics, their preferred explanation for what's known as the measurement paradox in quantum physics is Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation, infinite parallel universes, each one coming from a choice point of a sentient being making an observation. And that's kind of a nonsensical thing. It works perfectly for the math and physics, but there's a much simpler answer, and that is putting consciousness as primordial. Then you really only need one universe. But given this conflict between, church and science 400 years ago, where you get burned at the stake if you question the church too strongly, that science has been very kind of timid about challenging, church for many of those years, and then it gained this upper hand of materialist science successes. But the big reality is, over issues of consciousness and the mind-brain relationship, our modern science is going through a fantastic paradigm shift that is ultimately going to reveal the primacy of consciousness and the absolute power of our free will to determine events in this universe. And it's not the free will of the ego. I think that's the part that many people get very confused over. This is a lot of the work that Karen and I do is in our play shops is helping people to develop their relationship with that higher soul, with that primordial mind through the veil, through deep meditation and coming to see the win-win scenarios and the outcome of manifest through the binding power of love for all involved. I mean, these are kind of the bigger notions of how human events can evolve now as we develop this relationship with primordial mind and our higher self.
Yeah. Oh, I love hearing that. And thank you again for the efforts that you all are doing with this. And Eben, you mentioned that love is the essence of heaven.
Well, it's really the essence of that God force. And it's what, as Karen pointed out beautifully a little while ago, she achieved the same kind of incredible sense of infinitely healing force of love that is so comforting at this profound emotional level. I mean, it's why we feel at home in those realms, is exactly that love force. And I would say that ultimately it is the driving force of all that happens in this universe. And yet, of course, as human beings, we're aware of pockets of darkness and of evil and of people mistreating other people. And I would say that all of that is just an example of the absence of the light and love that each of us has the power to bring into this universe. So, in other words, unconditional love has infinite power to heal. And that's whether you're talking about the individual, the soul group, or all of humanity, or all of life on earth. That unconditional love has tremendous power to take us in the right direction.
Now, I want to just add that Eben and a lot of near-death experiences, when they talk about that love on the other side, when they're freed from their body and brain, they talk about knowing that love through identification, through becoming that love, and they feel themselves as that love. And that's something that I've developed right here and now, an ability to do, to generate love from within. And when you do this, you know, oftentimes love comes from outside, you know, another person, a dog, whatever, a beautiful sunset, something that causes this love inside. But in actuality, that love is inside each and every one of us, and we've just forgotten how to get there. Along with, you know, our beliefs in the Western world, many of us have learned to actually suppress our emotions. You know, it's like, don't cry and don't be angry out in public. So we learn to just put on our happy face out in the world. And this has served to really cause us to suppress a lot of our emotions. And we haven't really learned how to properly process them. And that includes even the ability to feel love. We know love in our minds. I can speak for myself. When I fell in love, part of it may have been that hormonal thing, but the other part was my mind. My mind was doing it. I had shut down my ability to feel when my parents were divorced. And at age 7, I made a decision in my mind that I didn't need my father anymore, that I didn't need his love. I shut myself down from the ability to receive it. And I think this is not uncommon in our world. And so as I grew older and realized what was going on, this concept of learning how to generate a feeling of gratitude in the heart area was one of the big keys. And at first I could only think of things I was grateful for. But when I could actually generate feelings of gratitude at will, based on my desire to do so and not some external stimulus happening, that's when I became aware that I was actually made of love from the inside, and all of us are. And so becoming the love that we are is a form of love of self. And this is something that when you become that love that you are, heart math research will tell you that whatever is in your heart, whatever emotional state you're holding, is actually influencing people around you. So I like to imagine a world where every single person is holding this love, the love that they naturally are in their hearts, and are influencing people around them without even having to say a word. And the more of us who take the time to do this, the more, as Eben will say, that unconditional love has infinite power to heal. The more of us who take the time to do this helps our world in unimaginable ways.
Well said. And absolutely, I've worked as a healthcare practitioner, healer, therapist for a number of years, and have taken the holistic integrative health route for a couple decades now. And a lot of the work that I find with people with physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever challenges they're dealing with, it pretty much often, well, I will say always, comes back to if the person is willing to go deep enough into a sense of lack of love, lack of self-love, as you said, Karen. And so why do you think people are, you know, not just automatically feeling love? Why is it something we need to sort of work at?
Yeah, well, I think so many of us have had what I call these baby wounds, things that happen when we're so young, things that happen in many cases before we even have the ability to talk. When we're babies, we don't have language to explain things away. And so many times, well-meaning parents are very often doing what they think is the right thing, and somehow it ends up you know, causing this misperception inside. And so we grow up protecting ourselves, and this protection leads to an inability to understand that we are made of love and that we are worthy of love. And Eben has a beautiful example of this when he talks about it in Proof of Heaven, when he was 11 days old and his birth mother gave him up for adoption. And in Living in a Mindful Universe, we go even deeper to how that emotional impact continues to affect him even to this day.
Now, I think it's important to point out that so much of that kind of discussion goes on at an ego level. That is our ego, the little voice in our heads, our sense of self, feeling affronted. In fact, you can even look at the way that in our modern culture, people sometimes tend to talk about love for others, but it clearly is a love with conditions. So that if people do certain things, they're not going to be loved. They're not going to be deserving of love, and that's an important distinction. And I think a lot can be gleaned from recognizing that little ego voice as not being who we are. I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, calls the voice in our head the annoying roommate. Yep, that's a very valid way to look at it. Now, of course, that ego voice is also, the linguistic voice in my head is part of my rational, logical mind, and how I basically communicate with other human beings about our ideas about the world. But what we're seeing here is that a lot of tremendous knowledge about the universe can be gained through exploring consciousness. That's why meditation is so important, and that's why NDEs offer a beautiful gift by detaching us from that little ego voice. I mean, the ego is the furthest thing from the mind in those extraordinary journeys. Certainly for me, and with no memory of Eben Alexander's life and all of that, set a stage for an incredible journey of discovery about, who I might be if I'm not just these little thoughts in my head. And I think that was a tremendous gift. And that's what a lot of near-death experiences bring back, is this oneness of, for example, the life review, which has been talked about since the time of Plato, more than 2,400 years ago. Life review is typically described, and I would say more than a quarter of the reported NDEs have a life review as part of it. But the interesting thing is when you hear many of these life reviews, you hear how people talk about they felt the emotional power of their actions on others during the life review. They didn't experience it as themselves. And in other words, the life review is an important teacher of how the boundaries of self in many ways are part of the fiction, allowing us to share the one mind and do this dream in the process of learning and teaching here in Soul School. But it's a much bigger kind of vision of all that. And I think one that's very important to understand. And Karen and I often talk about developing our relationship with that higher soul, with that primordial mind, thinning the veil and experiencing consciousness in that far richer and more complete form of similar to what is experienced in near-death experiences. But that binding force of love is so powerful. That's why it's the key for near-death experiences to come back to this world and never fear death again, because they realize the comfort and the at-homeness that's offered with that beautiful sense of basking in the love of that creative source of all that is.
Mm. Well said. Yeah. And as you said, Karen, not everybody needs to have a near-death experience in order to connect with these realms of being. And I just want to back up for just a moment. As far as the science expanding to welcome and receive these other realms of awareness and consciousness, that it seems that for a lot of people, what helps them to recognize that these are very real experiences, not to doubt that, whatever somebody experiences, isn't real. But of course there's, the question of hallucination, which I know you talk about in your literature as well. But people can have validation like you did with the girl on the butterfly. And also you two talk about your shared experiences when listening to some of the sound that you've created as well.
Yeah. So when I first started creating these sounds, before I met Eben, I had met this person, Kevin Causey, and he lives in Manhattan. I had lived in Baltimore at the time, so two different cities. But I had amassed a rather large library of binaural beats and other types of kind of mind-expanding sound. And Kevin told me that he was very, very interested in making his own binaural beats. And I thought he was crazy because I didn't think it was really that simple to do. But we ended up kind of embarking on a mission of where I would share my recordings with him, and then we would share a computer screen from afar, and we would start to take them apart and put them back together again in ways that we wanted to experience, and we would do it together. And so it all started where Kevin would make these recordings, and then I would get them over the internet. We would text each other when we were ready to listen, and listen at the same time. And this is absolutely one of the most amazing things you can do to help validate your experiences. Because what we would do is we would have a shared intention. We would listen to the same recordings, and then after we finished listening, we would get on the phone and tell each other what took place. And so very often we would have similar types of experiences. And while Kevin was incredibly visual and could describe things like he could describe here in the real world, I was more of a knowing or sensing kind of person. And so very easy to doubt my own kind of promptings. But when Kevin would describe the exact same thing that I was kind of sensing or feeling, this was very validating. And when we met Eben, it was about a year into this this kind of project, this personal project, hobby that we were working on. And we had developed quite a series of different recordings. And Eben was the first person, besides the two of us, that we had invited to listen. And he joined us in these three-way journeys from yet another location. And we would listen to the same recordings, the same intention. And the three of us would have some kind of similar types of experiences. And again, they weren't always identical, but they were similar enough that we would use them to validate. And this is how we learned together the kinds of things that a particular frequency set might offer to the listener. Again, it's not the same for everyone, but when three people could have a similar type of report, it told us, okay, we're onto something. And so taking time to develop a friendship, whether they live nearby or far away. It's hard when you first get into this sort of thing to find people who are interested, because, you know, at my job that I was working at the time, absolutely no one was interested in this sort of thing, and they thought I was a nut. And so it can be useful to find like-minded souls, other people, whether they live near you or not, to have these kind of shared journeys, meditative experiences with, both to validate and also to feel your connection to other people. When you do this with someone else, whether it's an entire group or even just one other person, there's a different quality to what you're experiencing. There's a feeling of connection, of togetherness. And when you're doing it alone, it can kind of feel like you're in a vacuum and nobody is there. And so it can really help. And I highly encourage people, if you have the opportunity, to do this sort of thing with other people.
And I would just suggest along the same lines, there is a number of growing communities online, and there's one around a project we have. If you go to ebenalexander.com, this banner wiggles in your face right there on the welcome page, your 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness. For free, people can leave their first name and email address there, and then they have 33 days of emails coming from us. And each one of those has a comments page. We've had more than 8,000 people around the world take the course to date. It has a translate button, so people from all different walks of life. But they're basically forming a community of like-minded souls there who are helping each other. And so it's this kind of thing, like our 33-day journey. It offers a setting for a community, for communication, so that you can find other like-minded thinkers.
So is that where you would, that's wonderful. Thank you for creating that. Is that where you would suggest people get started? Somebody who might be wanting to sense heaven on earth?
I think it's a very good place to get started, and it's free. And so we encourage you to share it with your friends. And it even comes with some Sacred Acoustics offerings, audio files that are very useful.
Although I will point out, the audio recordings don't show up until day 6. Some people expect them on day 1. They show up on day 6 because each day also includes a particular practice. And for those who are just pure beginners, or even those who aren't beginners, quieting the mind without the sound is a very useful experience. It's useful to try it both ways. And many people talk about the sound being some kind of training wheels or aid, And you can think of it as a temporary thing to help you get into these states, although it can be a very long temporary thing. Many people have different ways of incorporating them into their day, but it's a beautiful place to start. You can also go to sacredacoustics.com, which has a very wide range of different audio recordings, and something that Eben and I are just completing called innersanctumcenter.com. And this is a website that's going to kind of pick up where the 33-day journey left off, where we'll spend a little more time engaging with people and have an opportunity to have, monthly Q&As and really get further discussion going and really help people develop that inner world, really with the goal of finding some sort of inner peace. Who doesn't want to be able to cultivate some inner peace, whether it's your thoughts, your emotions, your worries, your anxieties? If you can find that peaceful inner sanctum within, that is a beautiful way to move forward with your life.
Oh, beautiful. I think everybody is looking for that. I did go ahead and purchase your CD collection here. I listened to it I listened to the first recording of the Om, and I want to just talk with a little bit with both of you about how you feel that, or why you feel that Om is really the sound of the universe. And when I did listen to it, what was fascinating to me, so I've been a meditator for many years, and this is actually my first experience using binaural beats, and so I'm really excited, and I love the science, of course, you being a neuroscientist, Eben, and how it can affect the brain stem and really open us up. That what I noticed is that I was able to connect with that deep time. What I sometimes refer to when I'm working with my clients or meditating, I go into that state of consciousness. I kind of sometimes refer to it as no time zone. And so I definitely am excited to be on this journey with both of you. I hope more people do sign up. And really, I think it's also a wonderful way to connect with others, as you say, to that collective mind. And I think everybody does want to feel that sense of connection versus separation.
Right. I think that's very important. For me, the sound Om was what I came back with of labeling that deity. I mean, the force that I encountered in the core realm, that infinite healing force of pure love without any conditions whatsoever, was something, new to me. When I came back to this world, the word God was a puny little human word with a lot of baggage that didn't remotely do justice to the power and purity of that love force. And that's why I called that force Om. But of course, I've come to realize that all of our religious systems really converge towards that oneness of a notion of a force that is one of love and that is there in our favor, there to help us through all of the events of our lives, both in the material realm and in the spiritual realm. And so it was just a natural for me to refer to that Om, but of course, Karen took that to the whole next level with the work of Sacred Acoustics.
Well, the thing is Kevin and I had already discovered the power of Om. Many people who know that the Hindu tradition, especially among others, have used that sound Om in ways, that have to do with vocalizing it with the voice. And Kevin and I had found that when you begin a listening journey, a sound journey as we call it, if you're able to vocalize that Om sound, and if you experiment with the pitches, you'll see that it creates a different level of vibration in your throat and your body. And when you're able to create a vibration in your body by vocalizing that Om, then while listening to it, it allows you to sort of merge your energetic self with the energetics of the vibrations of the sound waves. And so it's kind of just a metaphorical way, but also I believe that something else really is going on there with your non-physical self sort of being carried away by the vibrations of the tones. Om by the Hindus and others has been known to be that sound that creates that infinite now moment, that powerful presence. And so there's many levels of meaning when we chose Om to be one of our primary foundational frequency sets that we include on many of our recordings as the starting point. And the particular Om frequencies are actually built using the carrier frequencies of 108, 216, and 432. And anyone who knows anything about numbers and spirituality will know that those numbers are very significant, and all the numbers we choose in our different recordings are chosen very precisely and with harmonic relationships to every other sound in the recording. And so our Om recording is actually the free recording we offer on our website, a 20-minute Om recording. Just by going to Sacred Acoustics and entering your email, we'll deliver you that 20-minute recording immediately. And for many people, that's the only practice they need. And there's also a series of free training videos, I call them, on sacredacoustics.com that will get anyone started, no matter their budget. And of course, those who do have some more discretionary income, there's many other options to choose from. And we are happy to help you make that selection if you write to us at sacredacoustics.com.
Oh, wonderful. And Om is very similar to the word home.
It turns out we have a doormat outside of our house here that says, "There's no place like Om."
So we know that meaning.
We definitely get that one.
I'm sure you do. And may others know that at a very deeper level as well. So just a couple more questions before we wrap up here. So one of the things I've noticed with meditation over the years is that most meditations are meant to be done either seated, lying down, relaxing. Obviously, it's best to try not to fall asleep. And I know you give instructions on that as well. And things like mindfulness as a title, you know, that's involved in the title of your most recent book, you can train to be seated and then go into your daily activities with it. I'm curious if you are creating any sound experiences for people that they can listen to while going about their daily activities, such as maybe, you know, whatever it might be, cleaning the house, going for a walk, maybe bike riding or driving a car, if that's even possible.
Well, you mentioned driving a car.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I have to say we do not advise doing while listening to our tones, because they are designed, for the most part, to get the person into that hypnagogic state where the body is profoundly relaxed. I mean, that's the power when we can reduce anxiety. It's because we're relaxing your physical and mental and everything. And so that is a factor. So driving is not recommended. Now, we do have recordings that people use to study with, to movement practice, such as Qigong and things like that. So we do have recordings specifically for that. We have one as well that we created for childbirth. That's not exactly a daily living task, but it's
it happens.
Yeah, but it's actually called Cosmic Womb, and it's this beautiful resonant chime, and you can play it doing anything. Yes, you can play it to clean the house if you want to get into that zone. I have some people who play recordings such as Light Body, which is absolutely designed to be laying down and forgetting about your physical body. But I have a guy who listens to it on very low volume throughout the day with his earbuds, and he can hear what's going on around him. But he says it helps him with his neuropathy, the chronic pain that he has in his body. And he's able to just separate himself just enough from that pain using the recordings, but also still engage in his daily activities. And so while our recordings are designed for specific purposes, people are very creative in their use of them. And so I encourage people to try for themselves. Some people use them as walking meditations, and then maybe during a particularly powerful moment, they might sit on a rock or a bench and really absorb into the sound. But it really is up to the individual listening. We do recommend using headphones just to get that left-right differentiation, although speakers will work as well if you have that left-right differentiation. But so many modern speakers combine the bass or combine something else to create, you know, jazz sound or whatever it may be. And that tends to change the frequencies a little bit. So you want to use the most standard stereo setup that you can. And yes, experiment with trial and error to find the best way for you to experience what you're looking for through all the different listening methods.
But not driving a car.
Don't drive a car on those. No. That would be a big mistake. That's what's so amazing to people is how powerful sound can be. And the reason is most of the sounds we've ever heard, and that includes all the sounds, anthems, chants, hymns that have been used to induce transcendental states of conscious awareness in churches and burial sites and all that through thousands of years. Well, it turns out that these sounds all those sounds are basically processed up in the neocortex in circuits that have arisen in the last 1 to 10 million years in primates and in humans. But Sacred Acoustics, we believe, is having a profound effect down in the lower brainstem, circuits that arose more than 300 million years ago. And I believe that's one of the reasons why they are so powerful at kind of liberating our conscious awareness. And it's really something that you just have to play with to begin to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining that. It sounds like, pun intended, that it's, as you were saying, based on your experience with having the neocortex and everything basically shut down, that then we can open up to greater realms.
Well, that's why I was attracted to them, because I knew that something very profound had happened when my neocortex was taken offline with meningitis. And I believe that this is a similar way of taking the neocortex offline, by basically monotonizing its information processing by influencing this ancient circuit in the lower brainstem. And that would explain a lot.
Great. And then maybe this could, after we have these experiences, we can come back into waking consciousness and have our experiences be more harmonized, as it were, to be able to go into our daily activities, feel more joy, more love, more at home. I just want to ask one more question and wrap up if there's anything else you would like to share. How would you, Eben, how would you approach working with a patient now to address their healing that would be different than what you would have done previous to your near-death experience and all these great experiences you've had thus far?
I think it's much more of now a practice of kind of trying to open them up to the bigger version of their life and a bigger role. Wake them up to the concepts of reincarnation, all the strong evidence out of the work out of UVA, as well as the whole world of transpersonal psychology, following the lead of Stan Groff, Brian Weiss, Michael Newton, and others that have acknowledged that the only way to really make sense of the psychological issues we have in this life is by admitting we've been here in past lives, and we've kind of set up a set of lessons that we're here to learn and teach. So it's really one of giving them a much higher power, but power that goes far beyond what might be invoked by, the ego and its little sense of self and of self-preservation in a physical body, but help them to see a much bigger kind of version of themselves, and how potentially they can find a way towards physical healing, but maybe that's not meant to be in this part of the soul journey. So it's just an opening to a much broader idea of what the possibilities are and what the purpose of all this could be.
I love that. And may more physicians and healthcare practitioners do that to really allow for all of these inner experiences. As Dean Radin has pointed out with his research, that these experiences, a lot of these kinds of experiences, spiritually transformative experiences, psychic phenomena, and so forth, are really quite common, but a lot of people don't know what to do with them. And so it's great to have, may more healthcare practitioners and people in general be aware of this, so that we can honor and respect everybody's inner experiences. Is there anything either of you would like to share before we wind down?
I would like to encourage any and all of your listeners to take some effort towards exploring your inner world. Because as each of us takes the time to do this, as I said earlier, our outer world will start to change. This is a pathway towards making true change in our world. In the philosophy of metaphysical idealism, consciousness is in charge, and that consciousness is us. And as this paradigm starts to shift throughout our Western secular world, which it is inevitably moving towards, we are going to need to understand the power that each of us has as individuals. And as we become empowered, we need to use that power responsibly, with intention and proper attention. And as we clear out our inner worlds of emotional baggage and limiting beliefs, I thank each and every person for making that contribution to the whole.
I think it's important to point out this world is at an interesting juncture in its history and in human destiny. And in many ways, you are pelted by headlines that show all the polarization and kind of political insanity and lack of togetherness. But in fact, this message of awakening coming out of the scientific study of consciousness is really one of responsibility and of choice and of love and of caring for each other. And no soul left behind, Karen and I often say. Every soul is important in this journey.
Yeah.
But what we suggest is it's time to really take up the mantle of responsibility for this planet and for taking care of each other. And for living this life, the best way to express love for self is to serve as a conduit of that love of the universe for each and every sentient being, and to share that. So, being a conduit for that is a very important step, and each and every one of us can become such a point of light.
Mm. Hear, hear. Thank you so much, both of you, for this time together today. And everyone who's listening, please do check out ebenalexander.com, check out sacredacoustics.com and innersanctum.com. Is that correct?
Okay.
InnerSanctumCenter.com.
InnerSanctumCenter.com. May we leave with an Om together?
Sure.
Yeah.
Karen, would you mind leading us in that?
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Be well. Many blessings and love to all.